Nearly 100 Pawnee lay dead on the Nebraska plains in the summer of 1873, with two-thirds being women and children. But what makes this massacre truly horrifying isn't just the body count. It's that the entire tragedy could have been prevented with a single letter from the government that was never sent. The events leading to this catastrophe began in the tall prairie grass of southwestern Nebraska, near what would later be known as Massacre Canyon. Sky Chief, a respected Pawnee leader, crouched motionless in the grass alongside his 6-year-old son. Around them, dozens of Pawnee hunters maintained perfect stillness, their bodies tense with anticipation as they waited for the right moment to approach a massive buffalo herd grazing in the distance. Sky Chief placed his hand gently on his son's shoulder to steady the boy's excitement. "Be still," he whispered. "The buffalo hear better than you think. We must be patient." The young boy nodded, mimicking his father's controlled breathing. This hunt represented more than just an adventure for the child. It was his introduction to the most crucial survival skill of their people. For the Pawnee, buffalo hunting wasn't merely tradition, it was essential for survival. A successful hunt meant securing meat hides, horns, hooves, organs, and fat, resources that would sustain the tribe through Nebraska's harsh winter months. Every part of the buffalo would be utilized: hides for teepees, and clothing bones for tools, sinew for bowstrings, and stomachs for water containers. The Pawnees' dependence on these hunts reflected their dramatically altered circumstances. In the early 1700s, they had been a dominant force in the American Midwest, with population estimates reaching 60,000 pounds. Their territory had once stretched across vast portions of present-day Nebraska, Kansas, and parts of Colorado. They built sophisticated earthen lodges, cultivated crops, and conducted extensive trade networks. By 1873, the once powerful Pawnee had been reduced to a shadow of their former strength. The tribe had endured recurring waves of smallpox that swept through their villages with devastating efficiency. The 1830s outbreak coincided with increasing American settlement pressure, creating a perfect storm of biological and social devastation. When the disease returned with renewed virulence in the 1850s, it found a population already weakened by displacement and resource depletion. Contemporary accounts from missionaries and Indian agents documented entire family lines vanishing within days. Their elaborate kinship networks, the foundation of Pawnee social organization, left in tatters. The demographic collapse fundamentally altered Pawnee defensive capabilities, making them increasingly vulnerable to Lakota raids from the west. This compounding series of disasters forced a once independent people to seek the dubious protection of reservation life at Genoa, where their remaining population, numbering barely a few thousand, struggled to maintain cultural cohesion under government supervision. "The buffalo growing restless," observed one of the older hunters near Sky Chief. "Perhaps we should move now." Sky Chief assessed the herd's movement. "Not yet. When they settle again, we move." These annual buffalo hunts represented one of the few freedoms the U.S. government still permitted the Pawnee. The arrangement was pragmatic from the government's perspective. Allowing the Pawnee to secure their own winter provisions saved the Bureau of Indian Affairs significant expense, while allowing the tribe to maintain a crucial cultural practice. The previous summer's hunt of 1872 yielded extraordinary bounty for the Pawnee. Under the protection of armed agency scouts led by the legendary Texas Jack Omohundro, a renowned frontier scout cowboy actor, and longtime friend of Buffalo Bill Cody, the Pawnee hunters returned to their reservation with enough meat and hides to comfortably sustain their families through winter. Texas Jack's reputation as a skilled frontiersman and his respectful relationship with the Pawnee guaranteed their safety throughout the expedition. "Last year my father took 16 buffalo," Sky Chief's son whispered proudly. Sky Chief nodded. "This year we will take as many as the Great Spirit allows." What neither Sky Chief nor any of the hunters realized as they prepared for their approach was that this hunt would unfold without the critical protection they had relied upon the previous year. A bureaucratic oversight, a simple letter requesting Texas Jack services that was never sent, had left them vulnerable in territory contested by their traditional enemies, the Lakota Sioux. As the buffalo began to settle into their grazing pattern again, Sky Chief raised his hand, signaling the hunters to prepare. The Pawnee gripped their weapons, a mixture of traditional bows and modern rifles acquired through trade. Each hunter knew his role in the carefully coordinated approach that would begin momentarily. No one in the hunting party could have predicted that within hours, this routine seasonal activity would transform into one of the bloodiest indigenous conflicts in Nebraska's history. The absence of a single piece of correspondence would cost dozens of lives and accelerate the final decline of Pawnee autonomy on the Great Plains. The buffalo meat from the successful 1872 hunt initially provided the Pawnee with essential nourishment as winter descended upon the Nebraska plains. However, the tribe's security situation deteriorated rapidly as temperatures plummeted. Lakota war parties, emboldened by territorial disputes and long-standing tribal animosities, launched a series of devastating raids against the Pawnee Reservation at Genoa throughout the winter months. Inside a council lodge at the Genoa Reservation in February 1873, Pawnee elders gathered to address the tribe's increasingly desperate circumstances. The winter had been particularly harsh, with blizzards isolating the reservation for weeks at a time. More concerning than the weather, however, were the persistent Lakota raids that left families terrorized and essential supplies depleted. By early spring, the tribal council reached a unanimous conclusion. Another buffalo hunt would be necessary, not just for cultural reasons, but for basic survival. Their winter provisions had been severely depleted by the Lakota raids, and government rations proved woefully inadequate. The council formally petitioned the reservation authorities for permission to conduct another hunt, specifically requesting Texas Jack Omohundro to serve as their escort due to his proven reliability the previous summer. The political landscape at the Genoa agency had shifted significantly since the previous hunt. William Burgess, a Quaker appointee with little frontier experience, had recently assumed the position of reservation agent. His appointment reflected President Ulysses S. Grant's controversial peace policy, which placed Quakers and other religious denominations in charge of Indian agencies under the belief that men of faith would administer affairs more humanely than their military predecessors. Luther North, a respected scout who had served at the reservation for years, harbored deep reservations about the new agent. In communications to his superiors and in his personal journal, North characterized Burgess as utterly incompetent in managing Pawnee affairs. North documented that Burgess lacked basic understanding of tribal customs security needs and the complex relationships between Plains tribes. When confronted with the Pawnee Council's request, Burgess initially resisted. His Quaker background emphasized peaceful agricultural pursuits rather than hunting expeditions that might provoke intertribal conflict. Burgess believed that the government ration system should suffice for the Pawnee's nutritional needs, demonstrating a fundamental misunderstanding of reservation conditions. Faced with growing pressure and evidence of genuine need, Burgess attempted a stopgap measure by distributing the annual ration allotment earlier than scheduled. This temporary solution soon showed itself to be insufficient. The accelerated distribution merely meant supplies would be exhausted sooner, and the fundamental problem remained unaddressed. After weeks of deliberation and mounting tribal pressure, Burgess reluctantly authorized the hunt. However, the critical error that would lead to disaster lay in the administrative follow-through. The formal request to secure Texas Jack Omohundro's services was drafted, but through bureaucratic neglect or intentional oversight, never sent. Burgess, unfamiliar with frontier protocols and perhaps hoping to minimize expenses, failed to grasp the critical importance of providing adequate protection for the hunting party. The paperwork that would have secured Texas Jack's presence languished in administrative limbo, creating a security vacuum that would have fatal consequences. By late spring, the Pawnee received word that their request to hunt along the Republican River had been approved. The news spread quickly through the reservation, bringing renewed hope to families who had endured a winter of deprivation. The hunters prepared their equipment unaware that the protection deemed essential the previous year would not materialize. The Pawnee hunters had no way of knowing that their traditional enemies, the Lakota, were actively monitoring these same hunting grounds, considering them part of their own territorial claims. Nor could they have anticipated that the simple failure to send a letter requesting Texas Jack's escort would ultimately cost dozens of lives. As preparations for the hunt accelerated in early summer, approximately 400 Pawnee, mostly women and children accompanied by a smaller contingent of warriors, made ready to depart from Fort Genoa. They left with high spirits, believing the expedition had been properly authorized and adequately secured through official channels. This tragic miscalculation would soon transform a routine subsistence activity into the last large-scale battle between Native American tribes on the Great Plains. While Agent Burgess's failure to secure Texas, Jack Omohundro created a critical security vacuum. The appointment of John W. Williamson as replacement introduced an entirely new dimension of vulnerability to the Pawnee hunting expedition. What made this substitution particularly noteworthy wasn't merely the absence of protection, but the fundamental reconfiguration of authority and indigenous agency that followed. Texas. Jack, having received no response to his multiple inquiries about the Pawnee hunt, found himself at a professional crossroads by late spring 1873. Buffalo Bill Cody had extended a lucrative invitation to join his theatrical production, Scouts of the Prairie, in New York, an opportunity that combined financial security with celebrity status. With no confirmation from Genoa forthcoming, Jack reluctantly accepted Cody's offer, unknowingly removing the critical security linchpin from the Pawnee expedition. John W. Williamson represented everything Texas Jack was not. At just 22 years old, the agricultural settler possessed no frontier combat experience, no reputation among indigenous tribes, and no strategic understanding of Lakota territorial claims. His rudimentary grasp of the Pawnee language limited meaningful communication beyond basic instructions. Most significantly, Williamson lacked the network of informants and scouts that had allowed Texas Jack to monitor Lakota movements throughout the previous expedition. In private correspondence discovered decades later, Williamson expressed profound misgivings about his appointment. "I make no pretense of qualifications for this duty and have informed the agent accordingly." His agricultural background had prepared him for crop cultivation, not navigating the complex and often violent relationships between competing Plains tribes. What historians long misinterpreted, however, was the Pawnee perspective on Williamson's appointment. Far from a passive acceptance of an inadequate substitute, tribal oral histories and subsequent interviews with survivors reveal a strategic calculation by Pawnee leadership. Texas, Jack, while providing essential protection, had also imposed strict limitations on the previous hunt, controlling its timing, duration, and geographic scope to minimize Lakota confrontations. These security measures, while effective, had constrained the hunt's productivity. The Pawnee Council, recognizing Williamson's inexperience, saw opportunity rather than liability. With a nominal white protector who possessed neither the authority nor capability to restrict their movements, they could potentially conduct a more extensive and productive hunt, following traditional practices. Some elders viewed this as perhaps their final chance to hunt buffalo according to ancestral methods before reservation life permanently extinguished such opportunities. This calculation reflected a sophisticated balancing of immediate security risks against cultural preservation imperatives, a nuanced decision largely invisible to white authorities, who viewed the Pawnee request for Williamson as evidence of their docility rather than strategic agency. Williamson's official appointment documents, preserved in Nebraska Historical Archives, reveal the perfunctory nature of his commissioning. His compensation was set at less than half of what Texas Jack had received the previous year, reflecting both Burgess's cost-cutting orientation and the diminished expectations for actual protection. The formal responsibilities outlined in his commission focused primarily on reporting rather than defending, a bureaucratic formality rather than a security provision. As the hunting party moved southwest from Genoa into increasingly contested territory, Williamson's inadequacies became immediately apparent. Unlike Texas Jack, who had maintained constant forward scouting and flanking security, Williamson traveled with the main group, offering neither advanced warning nor tactical guidance. His presence represented a bureaucratic checkbox rather than actual protection. This fundamental transformation of the expedition's security posture, from actively protected to essentially undefended, occurred without most participants fully comprehending the magnitude of their vulnerability. They had entered a region increasingly viewed by Lakota bands as their exclusive hunting territory, a claim intensified by recent U.S. treaty negotiations that had restricted Lakota access to other traditional lands. The stage was thus set for conflict with a Pawnee hunting party venturing into contested territory with only the thinnest pretense of government protection. A single inexperienced settler carrying official papers but lacking any meaningful capacity to prevent the violence that would soon erupt at Massacre Canyon. By early August 1873, the Pawnee hunting expedition had achieved considerable success. Their hunting techniques, refined over centuries, had yielded approximately 800 buffalo carcasses in the valleys near the Republican River. Women worked processing the meat-scraping hides and preparing pemmican, while men continued hunting. The expedition's fortunes changed dramatically on the evening of August 4th. A small party of white buffalo hunters arrived at the Pawnee encampment specifically seeking out Williamson and Sky Chief. The hunters' commercial operators, who knew the region intimately, delivered an urgent warning. They had observed a large Lakota encampment approximately 25 miles upstream. Based on their observations of war preparations and intercepted communications, the hunters concluded the Lakota were actively searching for the Pawnee hunting party. "They're bloodthirsty," one hunter reportedly told Williamson, explaining that news had spread rapidly among Lakota bands that Pawnee hunters had entered territory the Lakota now claimed as exclusively theirs. The white hunters emphasized the unusual size of the Lakota force and their apparent readiness for conflict rather than hunting. Historical accounts diverge on the precise reaction to this intelligence, Williamson lacking contextual understanding of intertribal dynamics recorded in his journal that he found the warning disturbing but possibly exaggerated. He noted consulting with Sky Chief but lacked the authority or experience to mandate immediate withdrawal from the hunting grounds. Sky Chief's reaction revealed complex calculations, typical of indigenous leaders navigating treacherous political landscapes. According to multiple accounts from survivors, he initially dismissed the warning with apparent contempt. "These are white men's lies to stop us from hunting on our ancestral grounds," he reportedly told tribal members, suggesting the buffalo hunters might be attempting to eliminate indigenous competition for the increasingly scarce herds. This public dismissal, however, masked private concern. Contemporary Pawnee oral histories indicate Sky Chief ordered additional sentries positioned and instructed women to prepare for possible quick departure. These precautionary measures suggest he recognized the potential danger while maintaining an outward stance of confidence to prevent panic among his people. The morning of August 5th brought subtle environmental signals that experienced plains dwellers recognized as warnings. Buffalo herds displayed unusual skittishness, moving erratically, and responding to distant stimuli invisible to human observers. The normal patterns of bird flights changed, with several scouts noting the absence of typical morning movements. Sky Chief positioned himself with hunting parties in tall grass overlooking a small valley where buffalo grazed. His young son accompanied him, a decision that would prove fatal. As they prepared the morning ambush, Sky Chief's earlier bravado gave way to mounting apprehension. The prairie's warning signs had become impossible to ignore. The sound of approaching hoofbeats confirmed his worst fears. Rather than the rhythmic movement of buffalo, the percussion pattern revealed mounted riders moving with purpose and coordination. Cresting a ridge behind the concealed Pawnee position, approximately 50 Lakota warriors appeared fully equipped for combat rather than hunting. They wore distinctive war paint and carried weapons rather than buffalo hunting equipment. The tactical disadvantage became immediately apparent. The Pawnee hunting parties had positioned themselves to ambush buffalo, not defend against human enemies. This meant they occupied low ground, had limited escape routes, and were disconnected from the main camp where most women and children remained. Some accounts suggest Sky Chief and several warriors were busy skinning buffalo when the Lakota appeared, though Pawnee oral histories dispute this detail. What remains undisputed is the complete surprise achieved by the Lakota scouts. Without Texas Jack's security perimeter and advance warning system that had protected the previous year's hunt, the Pawnee had no intelligence about Lakota movements until warriors physically appeared before them. Sky Chief, drawing on decades of intertribal conflict experience, immediately recognized these 50 warriors represented merely an advance scouting party. The Lakota never committed their full forces immediately, instead using smaller units to locate and fix enemies in place before bringing overwhelming numbers to bear. This pattern, well established in plains warfare, signaled catastrophic implications. A much larger Lakota force undoubtedly waited nearby. The Lakota warriors, upon confirming the Pawnee presence, unleashed their distinctive war cries and charged downhill toward the exposed hunting parties. Contemporary accounts from the white settlers, who later witnessed the aftermath, described the scene as a swift and terrible slaughter. The Lakota, mounted and positioned with tactical advantage, closed distance, rapidly firing rifles and launching arrows into the vulnerable Pawnee position. In the chaos that followed, Sky Chief attempted to organize a defensive posture, but the positioning and surprise rendered effective resistance impossible. Within moments, he fell alongside his son and the warriors accompanying him. Unlike many indigenous conflicts where captives were taken for adoption or ransom, this initial Lakota attack showed no interest in prisoners, only elimination. The Lakota had perfected mounted combat techniques that emphasized mobility shock and overwhelming force. Their superior position, combined with the element of surprise and mounted advantage against Pawnee hunters on foot, created a military mismatch apparent to even untrained observers. As the dust settled from this initial assault, the surviving Pawnee hunters who had been positioned elsewhere realized the magnitude of the threat, and that this first attack represented merely the opening phase of a much larger assault that would soon engulf their main encampment. Following the initial assault that claimed Sky Chief's life, the surviving Pawnee realized they faced an existential threat. The Lakota scout force, having confirmed the Pawnee hunting party's location, withdrew from the initial engagement site. Rather than pursuing scattered Pawnee survivors immediately, they returned to their main force. Approximately 1,000 warriors concealed behind a rise several miles distant. The Lakota leadership dominated by war chiefs, Little Tal and Pawnee Killer. The latter's name, a grim reminder of long-standing enmity between the tribes, had positioned their main body optimally for a coordinated attack. Both chiefs had extensive experience in both intertribal warfare and conflicts with U.S. military forces, giving them substantial tactical acumen. The Lakota main force, upon receiving confirmation of the Pawnee location, mobilized with remarkable speed and discipline. The warriors moved in coordinated units. War chiefs positioned flanking elements to prevent escape, while the central force advanced directly toward the remaining Pawnee camp, where approximately 100 warriors and numerous women and children had gathered following the initial attack. Williamson, recognizing the catastrophic imbalance of forces, made a controversial decision that would later subject him to criticism from government investigators. Together,